Welcome back, everyone. We've got an awesome deep dive today into some research on exhaustion, the choices we make, and, get this, our honesty. We'll be pulling from research, real-life examples, even pop culture, the whole shebang. Ready to get into it?
Definitely, this should be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It really challenges how we think about things like willpower. Often we see it as a fixed trait. Someone's either got it or they don't.
Right, like strong moral character and all that. But what if it's not so simple? What if being tired actually impacts how honest we are?
That's exactly what some research suggests, yeah. It's this idea of ego depletion, the idea that, much like our muscles, our brain gets tired.
So the more choices we have to make, the more our honesty reserves are depleted. Is that what we're saying?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about completely running out of willpower, but it does get harder to resist temptation, especially as the day goes on.
Okay, so that late night snack craving, maybe that's not just me being weak-willed, but my brain being tired.
Exactly. And it's not just about food, right? Think about all the decisions we make every day, big and small. From what to wear to whether to speak up in a meeting.
Oh, or hitting the gym after work instead of crashing on the couch. I feel that one.
Right. So each choice, even small ones, sort of chips away at our willpower reserves.
Makes you wonder if CEOs should be making major company decisions at 4 p.m. on a Friday, huh?
Right. And there's actually research to back that up. Judges, people trained in making objective decisions, they were more likely to grant parole early in the day.
Wow, so scheduling really does matter. Like maybe if you're up for parole, aim for right after the judge's coffee break, right?
Maybe, yeah. But jokes aside, it shows that even professionals, people we expect to be objective, can be influenced by their own cognitive fatigue.
That is kind of wild to think about, huh? I wonder how many major decisions are made when people are just mentally wiped.
Right. It highlights how important it is to maybe be more aware of our own limitations, and those of others too, and also to create systems that account for those limitations.
Totally. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, want to talk about this link between fakes, like counterfeit stuff, and our moral compass.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating one. It started with actually this experience I had. Years ago, I was in Chinatown, got this beautiful Prada bag as a gift, right? Turns out it was real.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it got me thinking, what if it had been a fake? Would I feel differently, act differently?
That's a great question. Like, would knowing it was a fake somehow change how you saw yourself?
It could, right. And that's where this whole idea of self-signaling comes in, the idea that we learn about ourselves by observing our own actions.
So even if nobody knows it's a fake, that act of carrying it still tells our brains something about us.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this study about that they had people wear either real Chloe sunglasses, fake ones, or just sunglasses with no info about being real or fake.
Yeah.
Then they had them do this task where they could cheat to earn more money.
What happened? Did people with the real ones cheat less?
Not exactly. It's more like the fakes made them less honest.
Whoa, so it's not that real designer stuff makes you more moral.
Right. It's more like wearing a knockoff sends your brain a signal, like maybe you're not as committed to honesty as you think.
Wow, okay. So even just wearing fakes can nudge us towards being less honest in other areas.
It seems so, yeah. Pretty wild to think about.
Wild is right. It makes you think about all the little choices we make, like what we buy, what we wear. Could those actually be influencing our behavior in ways we don't even realize?
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
And that leads us into this other fascinating idea, the what the hell effect.
Oh, yeah, I think I know that one. Like when you're on a diet and you have one bite of cake and then it's like, well, what the hell? Might as well eat the whole thing now.
Exactly. It's that point where self-control just totally goes out the window. And turns out this can apply to honesty too.
Wait, really? They studied that in a lab. How do you even measure that?
Clever experiment, actually. They had people choose between two options. One paid more money, but choosing it meant cheating the system.
Ooh, tricky. So it's like a test of how long people can resist the temptation to cheat.
Exactly. And what they found was lots of folks started small, cheated a little bit. But then over time, they started cheating every chance they got.
So they hit a point where it was like, screw it, I'm going all in on this dishonest thing.
Yep, that's the what the hell effect in action. And here's the kicker. Remember those folks with the fake sunglasses?
Mm-hmm.
They were more likely to fall into that pattern.
No way. So that initial act of wearing the fakes somehow primed them to completely abandon honesty later on?
Like that first little cheat, even something seemingly harmless made it easier to keep sliding down that slippery slope.
Whoa, that's a powerful image and a scary thought, too.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, ready for another layer to this honesty puzzle. Let's talk about the link between creativity and dishonesty.
Oh, this one is fascinating too. Lay it on me.
Well, it kind of ties into that story I told you about fixing the answers on that car website to get the convertible I wanted.
Right, you sneaky devil, you.
Oh!
But I'm curious, how does creativity come into play with this kind of behavior?
It all boils down to rationalization. We're amazing at justifying what we want. And that's where creativity can actually become a bit of a weapon.
Like, we use our creativity to come up with better lies, more convincing stories.
Exactly. And the research seems to back that up. They studied pathological liars, people who just lie constantly. Turns out they actually have more white matter in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps us make connections.
So their brains are better wired for storytelling, and maybe for justifying those stories, even if they're lies.
Right. And it's not just with pathological liars. Other studies show people who are more creative are actually more likely to cheat on tasks when they can get a financial reward for being dishonest.
Wow. So our creative abilities can have a dark side too.
Seems so. And it's not just theoretical. In one study, they found that designers and copywriters, people with more creative jobs, they showed more moral flexibility than the accountants at the same company.
Huh? Makes you think, doesn't it? It's like that old Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how do we encourage creativity without also, opening the door to a culture of dishonesty?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
tough one.
yeah.
Something we need to keep in mind as we design our systems and structures.
For sure. Okay, before we wrap up this first part, I gotta bring up something that feels kind of contradictory. The upside of white lies.
Ooh, okay, that's interesting. I thought we were all about honesty here.
Yeah, we are. But this whole deep dive is about digging into the nuance, right? We've seen that our moral compass isn't black and white. And when it comes to lying, there's a whole spectrum.
Right, like there's a difference between lying to manipulate someone and, telling a little white lie to spare their feelings.
Exactly. Sometimes those little white lies can actually make things smoother, like when someone asks if their outfit looks good, and the honest answer would just hurt.
Uh-huh, right. We've all been there. Sometimes a little fib can help keep things harmonious.
But it goes deeper than that. There are times when white lies can be truly helpful, like helping people cope with something really tough.
Oh, I see. You've spoken before about your experience with severe burns, right?
Yeah, I have. And during that time, the doctors and nurses would always tell me everything will be okay. Now, looking back, I know recovery was a long, tough road, but those words gave me hope when I needed it most.
So even though it wasn't strictly true, it served a purpose.
Totally. It gave me the strength to get through those initial stages. And another example, when they had to take out these long needles from my hands, it was so painful. And the nurses swore up and down it wouldn't hurt a bit.
Knowing it would hurt could have made it even worse, right? All that anxiety.
Exactly. While it did hurt, that little lie spared me from weeks of worrying beforehand.
Wow, it makes you think, huh? Are there times when a well-intentioned lie might actually be the better choice, the more ethical choice?
Right. It really challenges the way we usually think about honesty. Sometimes the kindest, most ethical path might not be the 100% honest one.
It's fascinating how context plays such a huge role. A lie to manipulate someone is one thing, but a lie to help someone cope, to give them hope, that's a whole different story.
Absolutely. It's not just about the lie itself, but the intent behind it and what impact it has on everyone involved.
Exactly. And it's definitely a conversation worth having, one we should be having more openly. It really makes you think about another layer to this whole thing with the fakes, too. Like, it's not just how they affect us, but how they change the way we see other people.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's like that study where if you were wearing the fake sunglasses, you were more likely to think that other people would cheat too, right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
They actually had people wear, again, either the real Chloe sunglasses or the fakes, and then they had them fill out this survey. And hidden in the survey were these questions, basically designed to see how honest they thought other people were.
So sneaky. And the ones wearing the fakes were more cynical about other people.
Totally. They were more likely to think that, like, people they knew would lie in their expense reports or cheat on their taxes, stuff like that.
It's almost like they were trying to justify their own actions, like, well, everyone does it.
Right. It's like that one bad apple spoiling the whole bunch. Or, I guess, one fake apple in this case.
Uh-huh. Good one. But yeah, it's so human, isn't it? To look for evidence that everyone else is just as messed up as we are.
Totally. And in this case, wearing those fakes really did seem to prime them to see dishonesty everywhere. Like they were projecting their own, lowered standards onto everyone else.
It's kind of scary to think about, actually. Like, does wearing a fake handbag make you more suspicious of your coworkers?
It's possible. And it wasn't just about people they knew either. They were also more likely to think that, like, a manager would cut corners to boost profits,
Mm.
stuff like that.
Wow. It's like wearing the fakes made them more pessimistic about human nature in general.
It seems like it, yeah. It's a good reminder to think about, the messages we're sending, even unintentionally,
Mm.
not just to ourselves, but to others too.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about how being tired can drain our willpower, how fakes can influence our choices and our perceptions, and how creativity can have a dark side. What else have these researchers found?
Well, this is a good one. Self-deception. It's amazing how good we are at convincing ourselves that we're doing the right thing, even when we're totally not.
Oh, tell me about it. We're like masters of mental
I
gymnastics,
love
right?
that.
Twisting everything to fit the story we want to believe.
It's incredible. And there's all this research showing how we do it. They've designed these experiments that really expose our self-deception in action.
Ooh, I love a good experiment. Give me an example.
Okay, so imagine you're taking an IQ test. But here's the catch: at the bottom of the page, there's an answer key, supposedly for checking your work afterwards.
Oh, I see where this is going. Temptation.
Of course, right. Lots of people peaked.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Afterwards, they were asked to predict how well they do on a similar test without the answer key.
So the question is, would they admit that they cheated to get that high score, or would they convince themselves they were just that smart?
Exactly. And guess what? Most people totally overestimated their abilities. They genuinely believed that inflated score was their real intelligence.
That's classic self-deception. Taking credit for the cheating, basically. It's like our brains just really want to believe we're awesome, even when the evidence says otherwise.
Right. It's like this ego protection mechanism. We're always looking for confirmation that we're good, smart, successful, even if we have to make it up.
Okay, but what about when there are real-world stakes? Like, if there's money involved, you'd think people would be more honest, right?
You'd think so.
No.
But they did another experiment where they actually offered people money to predict their performance accurately. And even then, people clung to those inflated self-assessments.
No way. So even with cold, hard cash on the line, self-deception still wins.
It seems so. It's pretty wild. It's like our need to see ourselves in a positive light is so strong, it can overpower our rational self-interest.
Wow. That's kind of disturbing, actually. And it wasn't just about intelligence, right? They did similar studies with things like certificates and awards.
Yep, and the results were the same. People who were given a certificate for their initial, inflated performance, they were even more likely to overestimate their abilities later on.
It's like those external markers of achievement, even if they're based on cheating, they reinforce the self-deception, make it even harder to break free.
Totally. It's a good reminder that our sense of self isn't fixed. It's shaped by our experiences, but also by the feedback we get from the world. And sometimes that feedback, whether it's a certificate or a pair of designer sunglasses, can lead us down a pretty twisty path.
Okay, so we've all got this capacity for self-deception. Is there anything we can do to fight it? Like, to become more aware of those moments when we're fooling ourselves?
There is. The research suggests that if you make the act of cheating more blatant, more conscious, it can actually reduce self-deception.
Interesting. So instead of just glancing at the answer key, you have to really confront the fact that you're using it.
Right. They did a study where people had to physically move their cursor to reveal the answer key, so they couldn't just pretend they weren't looking.
And that made a difference.
It did. Those people were less likely to overestimate their abilities afterwards. It's like when we're forced to acknowledge our dishonesty, it's harder to spin that self-serving narrative.
So the key is to shine a light on those moments of temptation, make them more deliberate, almost like we're training ourselves to be more mindful of our actions and why we're doing them.
Exactly. It's all about cultivating honesty with ourselves, even when it's tough.
Let's be real, though. Sometimes we just want to believe those flattering stories about ourselves. It feels good to think we're smarter or more successful than we might actually be.
Right. It's the paradox of self-deception. It can be helpful, but it can also be really harmful.
Yeah, like a little self-confidence can be a good thing, but too much, and we lose touch with reality.
Totally. It's all about balance. Finding that sweet spot between optimism and, actually seeing things as they are.
And that takes honesty. Which brings us back to that idea of the moral muscle. If we want to make honest choices, we got to work that muscle.
Exactly. It's about building habits of integrity in what we do, but also in how we think.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Ego depletion, the power of fakes, self-deception. What other twists are waiting for us in this honesty adventure?
Well, this one might surprise you. The upside of lying.
Wait, what? Lying can be good. I thought we were all about honesty here.
We are, but remember, this is all about nuance. We've already seen that our moral compass isn't always black and white. And when it comes to lying, there are different types. There's malicious lying, and then there's, well, white lies.
Oh, right, right. Like those little lies we tell to spare someone's feelings.
Exactly. Like when your friend asks if an outfit looks good and you know the honest answer would just crush them.
Haha, yep, we've all been there. Sometimes a little fib is just easier.
Right. It can help smooth over those social interactions, make things a bit more harmonious.
But it's not just about being polite. There are times when those white lies can serve a much bigger purpose, like helping people cope with trauma or medical procedures.
You've talked about this before, haven't you? Your own experience with those severe burns.
I have, and honestly, the doctors and nurses would always tell me, everything will be okay. And, looking back, recovery was rough. But in those early days, those words, they gave me so much hope.
So even though it wasn't completely true, it helped you get through.
It totally did. Gave me the strength I needed. Another example, they had to remove these long needles from my hands. So painful. And the nurses, they swore it wouldn't hurt a bit.
Knowing the truth could have made it even scarier,
Yeah.
right? All that anticipation.
Absolutely. The lie, even though it was a lie, it spared me from weeks of worrying beforehand. It let me focus on healing afterwards.
These examples really make you think, don't they? About whether there are times when a white lie, one that's told with good intentions, could actually be the more ethical option.
Right. It really flips the script on how we normally think about honesty. Sometimes, maybe, the most compassionate choice isn't the one that's 100% truthful.
It's amazing how much context matters. A lie that's meant to manipulate someone is obviously wrong,
Yeah.
but a lie to help someone cope, to give them comfort, that's completely different.
It's not just about the lie itself, it's about the why, the intent, and what it means for everyone involved.
Exactly. It's a complicated issue, but a really important one to talk about. We need to have these conversations more openly and honestly.
It's like with honesty, we're always kind of walking this tightrope, right? Trying to figure out when a lie might actually do more good than the truth.
It really is a constant balancing act. And yeah, sometimes it feels like the answer changes depending on the situation.
Totally. Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the honest truth about dishonesty, what are some of the big takeaways you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
I think the most important one is probably just awareness. Like, by understanding these little quirks our brains have, how we try to save energy, how we protect our egos, we can start making better choices, more intentional choices.
So it's not about being perfectly honest all the time?
Right. Nobody's perfect. It's more about recognizing our weaknesses, and coming up with ways to deal with them.
Okay, I like that. So what are some things we can do to strengthen that moral muscle we were talking about, to make honesty more of a habit?
Well, one thing we can do is create systems in our personal lives, at work, even in society, that take these human quirks into account.
Oh, I see. So companies could have expense policies that make it harder to cheat. Or schools could focus on rewarding real achievement, not just handing out participation trophies.
Exactly. If we know our minds are constantly weighing self-interest against morality, we can create environments that kind of nudge us towards doing the right thing.
I like that idea. It's like we're designing our world to make honesty the easiest choice.
Exactly. And don't forget those moral biceps we talked about.
Yeah.
You got to keep them in shape.
So by doing things like speaking up when something's wrong, even if it's uncomfortable, or, resisting the urge to cut corners, even if nobody's watching.
Right. Those little acts of integrity might seem small, but they all add up.
Like we're weaving this tapestry of honesty one choice at a time.
And eventually, those threads create a fabric of trust, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us, too.
Man, this has been eye-opening. So any final thoughts for our listeners as they sort of continue on their own moral journeys?
Well, we've seen that even one little act of dishonesty can have, a ripple effect. It can affect us and the people around us. So maybe the question to ask ourselves is, what are some ways, even small ones, that we can make honesty a little bit easier, a little more automatic?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. It reminds us that integrity isn't some big dramatic thing. It's about those everyday choices we make.
Choices that really do shape who we are and the world we live in.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this depth dive. It's been awesome exploring all these different sides of honesty.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time on the deep dive.